Welcome back. We're on Chapter 22, A Speculation Story. The twins entered the bright and endless world of the portal potion. The story Connor had written was so short that it didn't take long for his handwriting to take shape and to form the world he created. He'd written the story so quickly there hadn't been time to include much detail. All that materialized in the empty space around them was a very familiar white door. Alex's eyes stopped glowing and her hair stopped floating above her head, and she looked around the story in a daze. I feel normal, she said. Connor, you broke the curse. How did you make it go away? Unfortunately, it's not over yet, Connor explained. You're still cursed. It just can't affect you in this story. I wrote about a world where curses don't exist. It's nice to have a clear head again, even if it is only temporary, Alex said. If we don't find a way to break the curse, I should just stay here. What kind of story is this? It was difficult for Connor to describe it. It's sort of a speculation piece, he said. I wrote a story about what our lives might be like if we'd never had a reason to move out of our old house. Sister's eyes grew wide when she realized what he was implying. You mean? But she couldn't finish her thought. Connor sighed. Maybe, he said. Let's go inside and find out. The twins went through the white door and stepped into the living room of their old home. At first glance, the room was exactly the way they remembered it, but as they walked farther into the house, they noticed a few subtle changes. All the photos in the picture frames had changed into current ones of their family. There were pictures of birthday parties, family vacations, holiday trips, and embarrassing school portraits. Even though the twins were present in each photo, Alex and Connor didn't remember any of these memories on display. It's like an alternate reality, Alex said. Look at school pictures like, this is me in 9th grade, but I was already living in the fairy tale world by then. Maybe we never discovered the land of stories, Connor said. If we stayed at this house, maybe Grandma wouldn't have had a reason to give us her storybook, if you know what I mean. Alex absolutely knew what her brother meant and nodded. Suddenly the sound of clinking pots and pans came from the next room. The twins weren't alone. They walked down the hall and peered into the kitchen, and both froze in the doorway when their eyes landed on the person making the noise. Daddy? Alex gasped. It wasn't until she said the word that Alex realized how long it had been since she had last said it. The twins' father, John Bailey, was standing just a few feet from them behind the kitchen counter. He wore an apron covered in flour and was in the middle of mixing ingredients in a large bowl. The twins noticed that their father was slightly older than their memory of him. His hair had started to gray around his temples, and his crow's feet were more pronounced than they used to be. Hi, guys, their father said. You're just in time. I know we promised your mom we'd try eating less sugar, but I left work with the biggest craving for chocolate chip cookies. I'm going to need help eating them before she gets home. He looked at his children with a smile they hadn't seen in 4 years. Seeing their father again made Alex so happy she cried harder than she had ever cried in her life. The tears of joy washed away all the specks of magic dust in her eyes. The warmth in her heart disintegrated all the magic dust in her lungs, and every trace of the witch's curse was erased from her body. Their father had barely said a word and had already done exactly what Connor hoped he would. Even though it was only a story, Connor couldn't help becoming emotional himself. The person he had missed every day since he was 11 years old was standing right in front of him. How could he not be moved to tears? John was very surprised to see the tears running down their faces. He wiped his hands on a washcloth and stepped out from behind the kitchen counter to take a closer look at them. Hey, what's wrong? He said. Did something happen at school today? No, Connor answered. We just really missed you. That's all. It's so good to see you again, Alex sniffled. The twins gave their father the biggest hug physically possible and cried some more into his shoulders. John eyed the twins suspiciously. Even in Connor's fictional world, John knew his children better than anyone else. Are you sure everything's okay? He asked. I'd love to hear what's on your minds. Well, Alex had a rough day, Connor said. Some girls at school were really cruel to her, and they made her feel bad and do some stuff she regrets. And even though it wasn't her fault, she won't stop blaming herself for what happened. Oh, really? John said. Well, if it wasn't your fault, why is it troubling you so much? Alex shrugged. Even though I didn't intentionally hurt anyone, people still got hurt because of me. I didn't know I was capable of such damage. It changed how I look at myself. John dried his daughter's tears with the edge of his apron. Well, the good news is it's never too late to write your own story, he said. If you feel like something is wrong, there's always a chance to make things right, no matter who's to blame. But you should never feel responsible for some other people's choices. That's too big of a burden for anyone to carry. I know, Alex said. I just always want to be doing my best. I hate looking back and feeling like I could have done better. But sweetheart, that's how we grow, John said with a laugh. What makes you think you have to be so perfect? I suppose it goes back to the stories you used to read us, Alex said. You raised us to believe that if someone is kind and generous and responsible, they'll have a happily ever after. So ever since I was a kid, I tried my hardest to be one of those people. I thought being perfect was the only way I could guarantee a happy ending. But now that I'm older, I realize life isn't a fairy tale, and no matter how much work you put into it, happily ever after doesn't exist. Of all the things his daughter had said so far, this concerned John the most. He took Alex by the hands and sat her at the kitchen table and had a seat beside her. Sweetheart, happily ever after does exist. It's just not what you think, he said. Happily ever after isn't a solution to life's problems or a guarantee that life will be easy. It's a promise we make ourselves to always live our best lives, despite whatever circumstances come our way. When we focus on joy in times of heartbreak, when we choose to laugh on the days it's hard to smile, and when we count our blessings over our losses, that's what a true happily ever after is all about. You don't get there by being perfect. On the contrary, it's our humanity that guides us. And that's what fairy tales have been trying to teach us all along. But what about death, Connor asked. How do you keep living a happily ever after when you lose someone you love? Now you're troubled over something you can't control, John said. The only power we have over death is how we choose to define it. Personally, when someone dies, I don't believe they cease to exist. The people we love the most will always be alive thanks to the stories we tell and the memories we share. As long as we keep our loved ones in our hearts, their pulse will continue to beat through our own. The twins knew their father was telling them the truth. If death was the end of a soul's existence, then how could he be sitting in front of them giving them advice? Connor barely had time to write the setting of the story. His father's words of wisdom weren't coming from his imagination. Well, I hope that was helpful, John said. Are there any other questions I can answer for you? There were millions of questions Alex and Connor wanted to ask him. However, instead of taking the moment to ask him anything, the twins were both compelled to tell him something. I just want to say I love you, Daddy, Alex said, with all my heart. Me too, Connor said, and always will. John was very amused by his teenager's loving behavior, but the sentiments touched his heart nonetheless. I love you guys too, he said, and don't worry, I'll always be right here whenever you need me. A soft rumble came from another part of the house. The twins didn't recognize it at first, but eventually remembered that it was the sound of the garage door opening. I guess your mom got off work early, John said. We're so busted. Quick, help me put away the cookie dough before she comes inside. Their father quickly got to his feet and ran back behind the kitchen counter. Strangely, the rumbling of the garage door never stopped. It became louder and louder, and soon the whole house was vibrating strongly. Object by object, the twins' former home turned back into the words of Connor's story. What's happening? Alex asked. The story must be over, Connor said. I've never seen it do this before, but I've never written anything so short either. We've got to get out of here. I don't want to leave, Alex said. If we don't get out of here, we'll end with the story, Connor warned her. That's the rule of the portal potion. Connor grabbed Alex's hand and pulled his sister out of her chair. Only after their father dematerialized into Connor's handwriting did Alex let him pull her away. The twins raced through the sitting room and out the front door and dived through the beam of light emitted by Connor's story. The twins landed back on the roof of the Freedom Tower, and the beam shining out of Connor's binder disappeared. Well, that was an emotional roller coaster, Connor said. How do you feel? Alex was surprised by her answer. Actually, I feel pretty good, she said. I think a few moments with Dad was exactly what I needed. Thank you for coming to my rescue, Connor. You really are the best brother in the world. I know, Connor teased, but you're worth the trouble. The twins helped each other to their feet and walked to the edge of the roof. Now that the curse was broken, the magical vines had stopped destroying the city. Manhattan was covered in so many plants the city looked like an enormous green grid. Wow, Alex said. Did I really do all this? Well, it certainly isn't my mess, Connor said. I barely remember any of it, she said. I can't imagine how upset all the New Yorkers must be. Before you start writing apology notes, we should think of a way to clean this up, her brother said. Everyone in the world is going to know about the fairy tale world after this. Alex sighed. Gosh, I wish there was a way to just put everyone to sleep and erase their memories, she said. It sure helped me deal with all the guilt. Well, why not, Connor said. It's kind of brilliant, actually. Do you really think it's possible? Alex asked him. For the first time in more than a week, Connor laughed. Alex, you just destroyed New York City in your sleep, he said. I think you're capable of doing anything you set your mind to. That ends the chapter. The next chapter is called A Presidential Surprise. I'll see you guys then.